It's often referred to as the finger of God in astrology, but is it pointing the way or flipping you off? Next on Horoscope Highlights.
This podcast episode is sponsored by Astrology Hub's Academy. Wherever you are on your astrology journey, we have a class that will help you get to the next level.
Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and this week I would like to talk to you about the double quincunx taking place between Mars and Neptune on July 6th and Mars and Pluto on July 8th. A double quincunx, for those of you who may not know, is often referred to as a yod. So let me go ahead and break this down for you. Personally, it took me a really long time to wrap my head around what a yod was. I was told when I was first taking astrology classes that a yod referred to the finger of God, the hand of God, that it was pointing the way ahead in your life, that it was supposed to be this very fated planetary aspect. And the more that I worked with it, with my clients and with myself, both in charts and by transit, the more I discovered there wasn't anything slightly predictable about the way that a yod was going to work. That oftentimes it worked contrary to someone's way of seeing how something was going to work out, or what their hopes or aspirations were, or even what their fears and anxieties were telling them. So there was this kind of like wild, unpredictable quality to the yod. And because it was packaged as being this fate, I couldn't help but think of the fickle finger of fate from Laugh-In. There was a part of me, a skeptical, cynical, Capricornian part of me, that simply put it on the shelf. I'm grateful that I don't automatically dismiss things. I have a wonderful ability, I think, for myself, given how intolerant a heavy Saturn and a very strong Capricorn can be. So I am rather sort of applauding this about myself. I do have a wonderful ability that if I don't understand how something works, I will go and put it on the shelf and get back to it later. Now, being Saturn ruled as I am, sometimes later can be 20 minutes, sometimes later can be the next day, and sometimes, like in the case of the yod, later can be 20 years. But anyway, so here I am to talk to you about the transiting yod that is taking place. A yod, as I mentioned before, is a double quincunx. Let me break down the quincunx for you a little bit here. The quincunx was a planetary aspect that, if I recollect correctly, was first identified by Paulus Alexandrinus. And Paulus Alexandrinus was an astrologer who was active in the second half of the century of the Christian era. So it's like basically 2 AD or thereabouts. And he wrote about 40 years after Julius Firmicus Macernus wrote his Mathesis. So he's after Ptolemy, and definitely before the medieval astrologers. So he introduced, or was first to mention, don't really know if anyone introduces anything, it's all been sort of like passed down through the generations, but he was the first to mention this idea of a quincunx. Now, obviously, he didn't use the word quincunx. That came later on, and I think it means 150 or something along those lines. The word that he used was aversion. And what he was talking about is when 2 or 3 planets were in aversion to one another. Aspects in astrology. Aspects describe the relationships of the planets. We have the conjunction, which is when 2 planets, sometimes it's more planets, are very close to one another in the sky. And so a conjunction basically means we're on the same page, okay? That there's this agreement that's going on with the planets. And opposition, which is the opposite of a conjunction, means that the 2 planets are as far away from each other on a 360-degree circle as can be. And being as far as you can be on a 360-degree circle means that you are 180 degrees, if you're counting. Or if you're using zodiac signs, it's 6 signs away from your own, or 6 months away from you in the zodiacal year, the calendar year. So an opposition basically means that, if you're born under Leo, then the planet that is opposite you is Aquarius. You're absolute opposites, and that there is no common ground whatsoever. It infers a conflict, but it's not a conflict like a square, which I'll get to in just a quick sec. What it means is polarization, okay? The more that one person says potato, the more that the other one hollers back, potato, with equal conviction. So it goes potato, 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 potato. Let's call the whole thing off, which often happens with oppositions. The two planets will just march away in different opposite directions. They want nothing to do with one another. The next aspect is a square. And a square is of the nature of Mars. It's combative. It fights, and these are two planets that are 90 degrees away from each other on a circle. So when they are squaring, these planets are fighting, and essentially they're fighting for the upper hand. Squares can be brutal and they can be hostile. They are of the nature of Mars, regardless of what planet is squaring the other. But there can also be a kind of collaborative effect that takes place with a square. For instance, if you've ever collaborated with another person or a group of people, then you know that different people can have very strong ideas. And sometimes the more dominant voice is the one that's heard, and everyone is kind of like muttering and complaining about them after the meeting. Or sometimes someone else goes up against, or maybe you go up against and you have it out, or you debate, or you are engaged. You are engaged in an active struggle. There's no calling things off and leaving. You're engaged in an active struggle. And this is what two planets will do in an astrological chart. They are engaged in an active struggle to have the upper hand. Then you have your more harmonious aspects, like the trine. The trine is a lovely, beautiful, wonderful aspect. It's something that, mysteriously, in recent years, certain astrologers have begun to criticize negatively, this idea of like trines facilitate or they enable, and you know what? Given how adverse the sky can be over our heads with the planets, I'm all for the trine. Okay, so what the trine will do is that it harmonizes. It brings the two planets together. Uranus, which can be rather cacophonous, and Mars, which can be very angry, and those are fighting words, when they are in trine, the trine brings out the best aspects of Uranus. It brings out the best aspects of Mars, so that they work together for the positive benefit of the person whose chart that they happen to appear in. So a trine will always bring out the best that the two planets have to offer, and it will bring them together for your benefit, to help out you. So trines are good. Sextiles, which are the last of the Ptolemaic aspects. Ptolemaic is adjective for Ptolemy. And Claudius Ptolemy was the first astrologer to really sort of write these down and explain them in his Tetrabiblos. And I think that's about maybe 97 AD or thereabouts. He was an astrologer, probably an Egyptian who lived in Alexandria. All right, so sextile, the two planets aren't completely in agreement, like a conjunction on the same page. And they're not really into helping each other out necessarily. But a sextile is conversational between the two planets. And what they're going to do, there's even a kind of negotiating quality to the sextile. What they're going to do is, if they're benefics, it's great, they're on the same page. And if they're malefics, they're on the same page, in terms of the way they see the world. But let's say it's Jupiter sextiling Saturn, which I talked about recently on this show. The two planets are going to put away their differences. Those differences will always be there, but they're going to bridge those differences and find ways to work with one another that are usually very creative and unknown between the two of them. So there's a friendly quality to the two of them, and they're there to help each other reach a mutual goal, to reach a mutual end. Trines aren't particularly interested in reaching a mutual goal or end. It's just, trines can be sort of like, what do you feel like watching tonight? I don't know, Netflix. Netflix, that's great. Okay, let's watch. Okay, so trines are like that. And sextiles are like, I don't know, I don't know if I'm really into Bridgerton. You're not into Bridgerton? I don't know if I'm really into it. Okay, well, let's find something which is kind of like Bridgerton, but not, world soccer or something like that. Okay. So there's a negotiation that takes place between the two planets. And those are the classical or the Ptolemaic aspects. Paulus Alexandrinus came up with or talked about or referenced something called an aversion. And we know it as a quincunx. And the easiest way to determine if planets are quincunxing one another or in aversion to one another is that you go to the opposition. For instance, I just said Leo is opposite the zodiac sign of Aquarius, right? So you go to the opposition and then you find the two zodiac signs that are bookending or flanking the opposition. Okay, so in this case, if Aquarius is opposite Leo, Pisces and Capricorn are flanking Aquarius. And Pisces and Capricorn both have no relationship whatsoever with Leo. Okay, so it's not Pisces and Capricorn are not fixed signs. Okay, so if it's a fixed sign opposite Leo, that's an opposition. If it's a fixed sign, the other two fixed signs, Taurus and Scorpio, both square Leo. Okay, so it's not fixed. They're not fixed. So we got rid of opposition and squares. It's not the same sign as Leo, so we got rid of conjunction. So that leaves sextiles and trines. Well, if we're starting with Leo as the starting point, the zodiac signs that are going to trine Leo are going to be the fire signs, because trine means in harmony, and it's in harmony via the elements. So the two fire signs, other than Leo, are Aries and Sagittarius. And those are not the two signs that flank or bookend Aquarius, so we throw them out. And then sextiles are the nearest signs to Leo that are complementary. Okay, so Leo is known as a yang sign. Traditionally, it was a masculine sign because it's in the element of fire. You use elements, by the way, for sextiles and for trines. And so a complementary yang energy to fire would be air. And so the two zodiac signs that sextile, they're close to Leo. They're not the sign next to, but rather the sign next to the sign that's next to, sextile. Okay, those two zodiac signs in regard to Leo would be Gemini and Libra. Okay, so these are the two zodiac signs that sextile Leo right over here in this trusty little finger that I have. All right, so again, Leo's opposite the zodiac sign of Aquarius. The two zodiac signs that flank Aquarius are Capricorn, that's the sign that comes before, and Pisces, that's the sign that comes after. So these two signs, Capricorn and Pisces, are quincunx. They are in aversion to the zodiac sign of Leo. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, because by transit, we have Mars in Leo, forming a quincunx to Neptune in Pisces, and then moving on to a quincunx to Pluto in Capricorn. When I say moving on to, and it might sound a little confusing because, wait, doesn't Pisces come after Aquarius and Aquarius comes after Capricorn? What are you doing to my mind, Christopher? Okay, we're not going there. What it is simply is that the first quincunx that Mars and Leo will make, Mars will be at 27 degrees Leo, so it will form a quincunx to Neptune at 27 degrees Pisces. And then a little while later, Mars will move to 29 Leo, and it will form a quincunx to Pluto at 29 degrees Capricorn. Okay, so that's how we're kind of like breaking that down here. So quincunxes. What's a quincunx? Okay, a quincunx in the original idea was planets in aversion to one another found one another. In the earlier ideas of this, found one another kind of like repulsive. Okay, there wasn't a hate, but a dislike and avoidance. And so it's kind of like, let's say there's a kid, you're a kid, flashback to when you're 3, no, let's make it like 5 years old or something like that. And mom's like, want some broccoli? And you're like, that's an aversion. It's like, no, broccoli. Okay, so that would be that idea. And that's certainly there. The planets in those signs don't make a good fit. But what I noticed and what came to me as a much more inviting for me, just sharing it with you. This is my idea, so you can be like, Christopher, you're like, and you can leave it on the table. Please feel free. But if it's appealing, then this is what I would share. What I liked was the idea of averting one's gaze. All right. And when you think about gaze, and it's fascinating, especially when you get into aspects like, for instance, if you hold someone's gaze, that can maybe be seen as challenging, okay? Or if you hold one's gaze, that can be seen as inviting and seductive. So the gaze, locking gazes is a big deal. And what they talked about here in the earlier versions of astrology, classical tradition of astrology, was seen and not being seen when it came to the planets, and that had some regard or connection to aspects. With quincunx, the planets avert the gaze. All right. So what's it mean when you're, talking to someone and suddenly they look down? What's it mean when you're talking to someone and suddenly they look past you? What's it mean when you're talking to someone and suddenly they look to the side? There's always this kind of like, are they bored? Are they uninterested? Did I say something that they disagree with? Is my point not getting through? Do they know something that I don't? Okay. So this idea of averting the gaze, which introduces a questioning element. This is something that I like to work with when I talk about quincunxes, because it's not hostile, it's not challenging, but it's not in agreement, and it's not in support. Okay. There's a questioning idea that we're seeing with the averted gaze. All right. And sometimes when people avert their gaze, they're like, oh, nothing, or I was thinking of something else, or oh, no, I'm listening. So this is really what the aspect talks about. And this is what I want to go ahead and share with you, or give you an idea or some images as you experience the moving quincunx of Mars to Neptune and then Mars to Pluto this week. The image or the moment, the episode, perhaps the scene. Okay. The scene that I wanted to share with you is the final scene in the final episode of HBO's Succession. All right. Now, if you haven't seen Succession and you want to see Succession, skip, because this is going to spoil. But, if you've heard about it, haven't heard about it, or if I don't want to, okay, then, or like, I like Succession. Okay. We're going here. All right. So basically, Succession, long story short, and it is a long story. I think there's like 5 seasons of it. Succession is essentially King Lear in the 21st century. It's modeled after Rupert Murdoch, who is the owner of the Fox News empire. And that's basically where the comparison stops. Okay, it's modeled after this family business. It's a family empire that was founded and is owned by Logan Roy. All right. And as you can notice right off the bat, Roy refers to king. Okay. So Logan Roy is the founder of this multimedia empire. As I mentioned before, is based on Fox News. And so in the opening episode, Logan Roy, he's celebrating his 80th birthday. And during the birthday party where everyone's kind of like lining up to kiss his ring or his butt, giving him presents he doesn't care about. And he's this gravelly, sort of cantankerous, not easy to get along with old man. He's very Saturn, very Capricornian, and in his presentation, very King Lear, if you're familiar with the play. So he's kind of going through everyone showing him favor, but he's bored and irritated and kind of like annoyed. On the helicopter back from a game of baseball, an impromptu game of baseball that they all play, the board of directors are there, as well as his children. Connor, who's the firstborn, Kendall, who's the secondborn, Roman, who's the thirdborn, and Shiv, who's the only girl, and she's the youngest. On the helicopter ride back from playing softball to celebrate Logan on his 80th birthday, Logan Roy has a stroke. And that sets into motion who's going to take over this vast empire. And the first one off the bat, of course, is Kendall. Kendall is the second oldest, but the first oldest in Logan's second marriage. And he's a very brusque, talking, expressionless son, the favorite son. Everyone sort of feels like he would be the successor because he's kind of taken over many of the duties of Logan. And he's very hard hitting, very on edge. He talks in like quick buzz phrases, sound bites, very, very quick, choppy sound bites. And he assumes that people are following him and they nod as if they are, even if they are not. And he's very sort of cutthroat in his business practices. And so he sort of takes over for his father for a while. And there's upset with the two younger siblings, Roman, who's the middle child, and Shiv, who's the only girl and the youngest. You can forget about the oldest, Connor. He's not really interested in the Empire, and he's kind of like a flake. So over the preceding weeks and seasons and things like this, Logan actually regains his strength and realizes that Kendall was a little, out for blood, a little quick to take over, and he's going to put Kendall in his place. And essentially what we have here, and it's really quite intriguing, is this father who dominates his children. The children have really been raised in the image of their father. They want to be like him, and they vie for his attention. There's very little talk about how difficult their childhoods were and things like that. And on the audience's part, there's not a lot of real sympathy for them because they've got more money than God and they've got more power than God. So it's hard to feel sympathetic for bazillionaires, But what's intriguing is that, and one of the great, the show has strength, everything's strong and wonderful about the show. It's an excellent script. It's an excellent cast. But what you see is that the sibling rivalry, the sibling pecking order, this going at one another, but then being in one another's corner is ongoing. Okay. And that's something that you don't really see in the Shakespeare play, for instance, or in many stories. Usually there's a pecking order and the siblings are at one another, and that's the whole story. But what makes Succession so absorbing is that these siblings go in and out of fighting with one another and being in one another's corner. They can't really say, I love you to each other, but you know that they love each other very deeply. And what really is portrayed in the script and the acting is really how damaged these children are, and how this father who refuses to recognize his successor is in part, it's the obvious male succession line type of thing, which is if he names a successor, then he's irrelevant, he's redundant, he's an old man, and he might as well go off and die. So he's not going to do that. And it's that brings about his full recovery. And you really then see when Logan makes his full recovery from the stroke, how vicious and malicious and unfeeling he is, and how he openly plays his children off of one another. And he plays them off with love, and praising talents and things like that. But it's always one-on-one, never in front of anyone else. And again, this is a man who delights in humiliating people. And that includes and oftentimes features his children. So we flash ahead to the final season. Shiv had a fiance named Tom, who's basically the biggest lackey and the most groveling of all characters in this entire series. The most petty, the most groveling, the most embarrassing. And he's played to perfection. And that's Shiv's husband because she wanted someone that she could dominate. And she has one. Kendall is estranged from his wife and kids. And Roman is the child that never grows up. And there's a lot of profanity in this language, so I won't be quoting from the show at all. But it's a profanity that really gives a David Mamet type of tone and pace to the script, although they do a lot more profanity than David Mamet. And that, if you're familiar with David Mamet, is saying a lot. So it's very high speed. They're involved in multimedia and all these sorts of things. Anyway, the kids in the final episode try to stage a coup. The father wants to sell Waystar, which is the name of the corporation. He wants to sell Waystar to this Swede who's kind of like this, the Swedish fellow who's very much this kind of algorithms genius or whatever. And he wants to sell it to them. He's not interested in a succession at all. And the kids, are now going to fight for the company in some sort of very misguided nostalgia or alliance to their father. What's interesting is that they're fighting to take over the company that they don't really want, but it's to show their father that they can. okay, or that they are, in the final analysis, these movers and shakers and schemers, just like Dad. And of course, their attempts are very clever and they're very shrewd, but also very obvious. And Logan built this company, and Logan knows his kids. And more than that, Logan knows how to bring his kids in line. At one point, Kendall loses favor with his father and is basically shot down in front of a board meeting, humiliated, and denied the succession. And he goes into a downward spiral. And until this point, he'd been a recovering coke addict, and he goes back and he's doing drugs and doing coke, just off the deep end. And during this period of time, Shiv marries Tom, her fiance. And at this wedding, on the way to score coke at some place in Scotland or something like this, the waiter from the wedding accidentally drives the car off the road, and like it's avoiding a deer that's in the headlights. And the car goes off the road, hits a bridge, and falls into a lake. And the waiter drowns, and Kendall survives. And he comes back, and Logan knows that this is what's happened, or finds out that this is what happened. And he he embraces Kendall, like, this is difficult. I understand this. You must feel awful. But at the same time, he now has something to blackmail Kendall with. Kendall will do Logan's bidding because Logan has covered up this accidental death. And seasons later, Kendall confesses this to his two siblings. And it's an extraordinary moment because someone died, and Kendall is full of very real remorse and guilt. And you see the siblings reaching out to Kendall and showing him love and support and, saying, well, it was an accident, right? And, And so it's this continual turning around in place, showing a face or an aspect that you were not expecting to see, seeing, people of tremendous wealth and power really appear human and in what could be a typical conversation and an exchange of sympathy. These are the things that keep it very intriguing. I mean, they are talking about, the death of another person, but, this is what happens when you watch this show. It's like you're always remembering what's so hideous about them, but at the same time, it's in such dramatic contrast to their humanity and to their love and support of one another. So Shiv and Roman they are aware of this death, and they tell him all sorts of comforting things and things like this. And it was an accidental death. It was by no means a murder, but it should have been reported to the police. So we now get to the final scene, and they're going to try to take over the company from their dad. And again, it's kind of like fused by anger of like, screw you, Dad, for not passing the succession to us. And then at the same time, it's also kind of like, see, we are capable. We are made in your image. We can be tough and whatever, just like you. Do you approve of me? Do you love me? This is always an ongoing thing. And there's a final conversation. It's the last conversation that Logan has with his children when they have the upper position. They actually have the votes on the board of directors to confound their father and to stop this sale to the Swede, when the father just looks at them with great exasperation. But there's also a mix of something tender and soft at the same time. You see the fatherly light in his eyes, and he just looks at the three of them and he says, you are just not serious people. You're bringing up these, Lucy and Ethel hijinks of taking over the company, and you have no real interest in running it. And neither of you really wants this. And you're doing this just to stop something that I want to do. And you are just not serious people. And it ends up being the last thing that he says to them, because it's while he is flying to Sweden to finish the deal that he surprisingly has a heart attack and dies on the plane. No fanfare, no big deal. The father has died. And suddenly, succession is thrust upon these three kids, Kendall, Roman, and Shiv, where they have to convince the board not to sell to the Swede and to give the company over to them. Now, being the heirs, they each have a vote on the board, and they quickly go and shore up these alliances. And Shiv has actually been sort of playing the background in this. She's resented being condescended to as not only the youngest child, but also a woman. She kind of sees herself as maybe being the CEO or whatever, and she meets with the Swede secretly and effects a deal where the Swede will purchase the company, but she will be put in as a proxy. Okay. And the Swede agrees to this. And so this is Shiv's way of saying, see, brothers who condescended to me, I'm pulling the final move and I've outwitted both of you. So again, what's amazing is that they're dealing with billions of dollars with all the earnestness and casualness of a kick the can game. It's like, it doesn't matter the impact it has on lives of employees or anyone else. It's still trying to best one another, but it's not driven by a great hatred or hostility either, because they do love one another, and this is still a game. And this line that they ride in the show is really, really extraordinary. But each one of them has their weaknesses. Kendall is scary ambitious. Now that he sees the possibility of the company being given to the kids, he wants to be the one who's actually the CEO of Waystar. And the other two kids, they're not as experienced. They don't know the company as well as he does. So he's back from having done a deep six to himself with drug addiction, things like that. He's back from that. And now he's back to the killer shark, scary, ambitious Kendall. And Roman and Shiv immediately pick up on that. And they're like, whoa, okay, return of scary, ambitious Kendall guy. Okay. Roman, who speaks in the most cruel and hateful ways and acts with great malice and indifference to everyone. What you also see through this show is that he's compensating for a very soft and sensitive side that is desperate for his father's approval. And Logan is able to manipulate Roman all the time. And so Roman sees himself like, well, I could be CEO. I could do it. Why should Kendall get it? And then Shiv, who's been playing one off the other and things like that, is just sort of like, I can do it too. But Roman's weakness, if Kendall's weakness is a scary ambition, Roman's weakness is a softness, a sensitivity. He has feelings and they're very deep, no matter how much he tries to cover them up or to, show this really off-putting, rude side to his behavior. And it's very rude. It's aggressively rude, but it's not because he's a rude person. He's doing it because that's the way you put someone in their place, and that's the way you express and exhibit power. And then Shiv's fatal flaw is that she cannot make a decision. She cannot follow through with a decision. She's a political consultant, and so she helps politicians, win elections and things like this. And she's very aware of rules and laws and things like this. And even though now here at the end of the series, she's in the driver's seat, she's the one who's going to collect all the cards and really be in the best position possible. She finds out that the Swede actually wants to make her husband, the lackey, the groveling Tom, the proxy person, and cut Shiv out. And so Shiv is now siding with her brothers to take over the company and to show that Swede, who's boss. And so it comes down to a board vote, and it's very suspenseful. And of course, the board is split exactly in half. And the last person to decide this, the person who casts the deciding vote in this, of course, is Shiv, the red-haired, beautiful, brilliant Shiv. And of course, Shiv stammers and she doesn't know what to do. And like Kendall and Roman are like, come on, we want to take over the company. This is it. We've got it. Shiv. And she's like, I need a moment. And they're like, and so she leaves and she leaves the boardroom where they're taking this final decisive vote. And she goes to an office by herself and everything's got glass. So you can see that she's pacing and whatever. And Kendall and Rome, of course, can't leave her alone. They go running after her. And Kendall is pleading with her. He's saying, Shiv, come on, this is, and Roman's like, this is the way you wanted it. She's like, but I, and they're like, what is it? And it's at that moment, and it's very human. It's a very powerful moment where it's kind of teetering on the brink, that instead of it going in, Shiv, come on, pleading, like, or we'll give you your time or whatever, they go into their dad, both of them, and they get very aggressive. particularly Kendall, and he's like, come on, don't be spineless. Cat's the final vote. This is what you wanted to do. And that begins to put her off, of course. And she is reacting to him like she would react to her dad. All three of them, the way they play those psychic scars from their childhood and the way it comes up is extraordinary. And she reacts to him like, and he's like, Shiv, you've got to vote. And she's like, and she's like, and she turns to Kendall and she's like, I can't vote for you. And he's like, why not? And she's like, you killed a man. And he's like, what? And she's like, you killed a man. I mean, someone died. That's gonna come out. And it's not even like she's offended by the crime, but she knows the PR. She's a political consultant. She's like, she sees Ted Kennedy, Chappaquiddick. She's like, it's gonna come out. And it's going to become a huge scandal that can ruin this company. You can't just write that off, Kendall. And Kendall in desperation says, well, I was lying. She's like, what? And Roman's like, what? And he's like, I was lying. I made it up. It was a thing. It never happened or whatever. And Roman's like, what? And Shiv's like, but there's the fact that he tried to lie, that stops both of them. Roman is now with Shiv, which is like, and Shiv says, you cannot run this company. You are not fit to run this company. And it's at this moment that the actor playing Kendall, you just see that he has lost his soul. And he says to her, Shiv, this is all I know how to do. Shiv, you've got to give me this, Shiv. It's all that I know. And she's like, I can't. I love you, but I don't want you to do this. It's wrong. And Roman at that point is just like retreated to like middle child, I don't exist status. And so she goes into the boardroom and they follow after her. And Kendall is like yelling after her and she votes for the sale. The board of directors is happy. They win the day. And what you see is the shattering of these three lives. Okay. But it's not really shattering. You know that they're going to go on. But Tom, Shiv's husband, who she's had a very rocky relationship with and still does. Shiv's also pregnant with their child. She just discovered that like a few days before. Tom becomes the proxy. The Swede is very, very happy. There's all this money that's going to be made. And what you realize is that Kendall has lost himself utterly. Roman will always be the boy that never grew up. And Shiv, just couldn't, because she couldn't make that decision, turns around and she makes technically the right decision, but it wasn't made out of a sense of righteousness or doing something that was right. It was really brought in to really mask her inability to decide or to break away. And it's not even to benefit Tom, her husband, who is the ultimate beneficiary, as is Shiv, but she doesn't like him at all. And as they drive away in one of their cars, he puts his, this brooding theme music, this pounding theme music begins to play. He puts his hand on hers and she's her gaze is averted. She's looking out the window and, he's holding onto her hand, but you can see she's not squeezing back and she's averted her gaze. She's looking out the window. And this to me is just such a wonderful expression of the three planets that we see forming the double quincunx this week. If I may, you have what I call I could have it, I should have it, and I have to have it. Okay. Mars is the planet that is quincunxing both these planets. So it's the pivotal planet of the double quincunx. It's the pivotal planet of the yacht. It's the most important planet. Okay, because it's the one that's triggering the double quincunxes. Mars is the one that's triggering the yacht itself. And so Mars is about, I want it. Okay, I want it. But Mars with that Neptune and Pisces, the intermingling energies is because Neptune and Pisces isn't forceful like Mars. It's not focused like Mars. There's always a kind of ambivalent quality that a Neptune contact can introduce to any planet that it comes into contact with. And Neptune in Pisces is so much about the potential of something, that this could be a possibility. This could be a vision, a dream, a whim, a possibility. So with that, I really assign to it I could have it, and that's kind of like the Roman character, I could have it. I could see this happening. And so this is almost the intermingling of those two energies. And then the Mars in Leo is, I should have it. Okay, so Mars in Leo wants something, but it wants something from the point of view of an entitlement, okay? Because there's that kingly, royal, flavor to the Mars in Leo. So where Mars in Aries is like, I'm going to go after this and fight for it and fight a contest or whatever, and or Mars in Capricorn is facing the challenge and going up again. Okay, Mars in Leo is, I should have it, in regards like, it's mine. Okay, like I'm entitled to have this. I should have it, And it's interesting because the I could have it part of this double quincunx is ambivalent. Okay, it could go either way. I could have it if I applied myself, if I really committed to this. I could have it. With the Mars in Leo is I should have it. Remember, the quincunx is bringing out the averted gazes of all three planets. They're not locking eyes with one another. Okay, so I could have it. I should have it like that. I should have it. This is an entitlement, Mars and Leo, and then I have to have it, which is the Mars and Pluto. I have to have it. You're not even looking at the other person. It's like, it's the focus on I have to have it. Okay. And so these three energies, are going to be combining this week. And what you might want to ask yourself, in regards to the it that you want, are you feeling like I could have it, like that's a possibility, or I should have it? And if you hear should have it, there isn't really a claim to ownership. I should have it. So maybe I should direct my actions towards this because I should have it, but you're not really behind it. Okay. And then I have to have it has nothing to do with the it. It has everything to do with the obsession and with the focus that you feel about it, because Pluto is the planet of obsession in astrology. It's a lot of things, but one of the qualities of Pluto in astrology is obsession. Okay. And so you see the three planets coming together, but they're not going to find a fit. All right. And this is the thing to understand about the double quincunx. They're not going to find a fit. With a square or an opposition, they're of the same, what the Greeks called genus. And the genus here is relationship. You can be angry or you could be opposed, but you're in some sort of regard to relationship with one another. You're seeing one another. Sextile and trine, there's support, empathy, negotiation. But with the quincunx, it's the averted gaze. And so there's an averted gaze even about the object. I could, I should, I have to, and so it's not clicking. It's not a natural fit. Okay. And so two things result from this. There can be the realization that forcing a fit will never fit. Okay. And that's why I shared with you that last scene of Succession where Shiv changes her stance. They are forcing a fit with Shiv, but this was something that never clicked. Roman and Kendall never clicked. Roman and Shiv never clicked. Shiv never really clicked with Roman, and she never really clicked with Kendall. They love one another, they support one another, but they don't really see eye to eye or click when it comes to something like this. So they're forcing a fit. And in their heart of hearts, all three of them know that they're forcing a fit. Roman has been questioning all along whether they could run the company, whether that's a good idea. Why not just sell it and get rid of it? And it's because of his father's death that now he feels this need to keep the company going. But it's not even a fit with his father's death because his father never wanted the company to keep going. The father wanted to sell it. And so it's this kind of like off-kilter relationship. It's being done to honor the father, but a father who his last wishes was not to keep the company in the family. It was to sell it. It was to provide even more money for all the kids, and they could go off and do whatever they wanted to do. Okay, as well as himself. So the father doesn't have a great sentimental attachment to the company at the end of this show. So they're forcing a fit that will never fit. It brings back Logan's words. You are not serious people. You are trying at something. You are faking something. You're maneuvering for something, but not seriously. It's not connected to something you truly want. And this is something that's coming out in this double quincunx that's connecting to Mars. Okay. And it would connect to Venus in the same way, or Saturn, or any other planet. But this week we're talking about Mars, and it's what I want. And so it's forcing a fit that will never fit. But what happens with the quincunx is that the planets involved will keep returning to it again and again and again and again and again. Okay? You can realize when you have planets quincunxing in your chart that there will never be a fit. You're trying to make peace with it. Maybe you do make peace with it. And then you get this feeling of one more time, one more chance, it's going to work this time. And so it brings you back. So this can be the nefarious quality of a quincunx. It's never going to fit, but you can't quit it either. And you're brought back to it, and it still doesn't fit. That's one way to look at this sort of event that I'm describing in your own life. The other thing is that they might come together. You might get the planets together. You might get something that you want to work with the desired object, and that it does come together, but it comes together despite what you wanted. Okay, so in other words, it comes together, but then it kind of wildly spins off in a different direction. Let me go and illustrate that. Okay, they lose this board vote, all right, and so it's sold to the Swede. Okay, and Tom, Shiv's husband, becomes the proxy owner of it. What happens in the end, and I think this is where the fated quality of the yod comes out. What happens in the end is everything that Logan had intended. Logan had intended the company be sold, and that there be all this money for him and his board and everyone else. The kids fight this. They fumble the ball, which is really, again, another image of this quincunx energy. It's the fumbling of the ball, and the ball is fumbled, and it goes through. Now, the ball is fumbled for two reasons. First, the character of the three kids and the fact that they can't get it together comes out. This has been the ongoing tension throughout the entire show. And it comes out in this climatic moment. And so it's fated in that their characters are what doom their actions. Shiv can't make the decision. Roman isn't a killer, and Kendall is too much of a killer, but they're all parroting these bizarre versions of their father. Okay, it's not who they really are. And so that fumbling, and so their character comes out, but also what's fated comes out because this is what Logan had intended all along, okay, which was for the company to be sold to someone who's outside the family, and that be the end of it. So in the end, everything plays out as fated, okay, but in an entirely unpredictable way. But if you take a couple of steps back, you could see how that was going to be done. That strange sense of fate, whether it's bringing out something that was always in you, a quality of your character that was always in you, and now it's here, and it's either rewarded or exposed as something which is of a fault. Okay, that's usually what happens in a Greek tragedy, which is where this whole idea of fate really originates. Okay, or there's this accidental foiling. No matter what you do, you cannot control this action. It's a slippery football. There's this accidental foiling that actually ends up being for the best of everyone involved. Okay. The kids would have made miserable magistrates of this or custodians of this company. It would have gone to ruin. You can see that they're ridiculous in their decision making. But and so it's right in that regard, but it's also right because that was what the original intention always was. So this idea of something fated but not controlled, something fated but not really understood, something fated but not recognized, but somehow it will still play out for the best. That's how I want you to think of this week's double quincunx. And we have to ask ourselves whether that's fate or an accident of fate. That's what the double quincunxes are all about. Whether it's fate or an accident of the fate is anyone's guess. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Horoscope Highlights. Please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Your support means a lot. See you next week.